Good evening. Hi guys, my name is Daniel Hance. I'm the founder and CEO of The Catalyst. We are a military veteran transition entity. I'm joined by two handsome fellers. Mr. Joe, Captain Type Catula.
Good evening.
And Mr. Thomas Edison Lowe.
Good evening.
Thomas and Joe are not only buddies of mine, but they're also my business partners. Thomas is a military brat, grew up in a military household, so he grew up observing the transition his father went through. So he has a strong understanding of that. And then Joe had transitioned himself. Let both of those gentlemen kind of discuss their own specific examples or their own backstories. So without further ado.
You know, from the transition aspect, as a civilian, never served in the military, but my father was an 82nd Airborne. You know, you realize some of the things that you know from stories that you've heard from your parents and other things, these massive amount of skill set that military personnel leave our armed forces with that I don't think always translate effectively. And that's the problem that we're trying to solve. So when I look at this problem, what I see is a bunch of talented young men and women that are leaving our armed forces that don't know how their skills are going to transition into a for-profit world. So when we're looking at a for-profit world, what I see is we have some of the best logistics people out there. You know, we have people that are very skilled and talented at moving people and personnel, as well as working on a tight budget. People don't realize it, but the money that gets spent in the military, there are budgets and constraints, and people have to figure out how to live within those constraints, just like any Fortune 500 company would. And oftentimes they're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars in assets, extreme deadlines, and often, you know, in extreme environments. I mean, how often in the private sector are you going to have to deal with worrying about getting blown up? But that's a reality of folks in our armed forces. And they're doing this and doing it very successfully. We're the best in the world at what we do. So from a private sector piece, you know, what I'm interested in doing is educating those CEOs, CFOs, COOs out there about what this problem is and how we can help them better use military folks and not bring them in at the lowest level on the totem pole, but bring them in at the appropriate level where they can utilize those leadership skill sets, those logistics skill sets, those management skill sets, those work under pressure skill sets. I think those are the things that are going to be important going forward. And, you know, I think Joe can talk to, you know, his experience from the transition and things that, you know, went well, didn't go well. Mm-hmm. You know, I'd be interested in hearing your perspective.
Yeah, exactly. So I transitioned in 2009, fresh off deployment from Afghanistan. So we were over there building roads. Immediately left, you know, transitioned as soon as I got back. So went from leading men and women into combat to managing a spreadsheet. So, you know, I completely understand the translation of skills. You know, just to go out on a convoy, just to run an operation in the military involves so much planning. It's the equivalent of a major product push, a major launch, you know, and all of that is done daily with limited resources. And, you know, both human resources, financial resources, and equipment resources. And there is no option of not getting it done. And I think that's the biggest thing that military veterans transitioning into corporate America bring, is that idea that failure is not an option, right? I mean, we're coming from a game where failure meant that, you know, your brother or sister's not coming back. Right, so now it's you know, whether or not you're gonna hit a launch date or you're going to make a project and save the company money. I mean, I'm not belittling what the corporate America is, but you know, they've gone through the crucible and done it under much dire circumstances. You know, that they're not going to get rattled if a purchase order isn't put in time, if a vendor doesn't deliver on time. You know, they're always looking at, like, how do I fix this problem? And I think that's the thing that I've found, even in veterans that I've run into in the workplace, is there is that common bond of how do we fix stuff and do it as fast and as cheap as possible, right? And these are the skill sets that you just are inherent to folks coming out nowadays. And that's something like this where I could have gone around and tried out different careers, before settling on something. I mean, it's the right thing to do. Like, where do you fit in, right? And that's really the biggest thing we're offering is where do we fit you in at, and where is your passion? So if we compare those two, we have happy transition veterans.
Yeah, I mean, both of you guys bring up great points, and that's the bottom line, guys. As at the end of the day, if you look at it on both sides, the military, we know that we come out, we're confident in our leadership skills, we're confident in our team building skills, our effective communication, all that stuff that transfers over to high level. What we suck at is effectively communicating that in what we call commonly civilian terms. Inversely, civilians have a hard time understanding where we immediately impact their bottom line. So all we are in the Catalyst is that mediary that comes in and helps both sides not only get to know one another, but also better understand each other at an expedited rate, and again provide the transitioning veteran an opportunity to explore their passion, and find what the next evolution is for them, and at the same time help the company find the best business fit for them. Because at the end of the day, this is now a socioeconomic problem, and we have real working, proven solutions, and that's why we're here. We're here to come in. I've gone through it myself. That's how I came up with the idea for the Catalyst, and transitioning myself, and and listening to guys like Joe and listening to guys like Thomas say, hey, listen, there needs to be something in place, and so finally we all got together and created it.
So I think it'd be helpful if you kind of shared some stats around the transition. What are we looking at as far as for people-wise? Because I think that's the hard scope for a lot of private sector people to realize. And, putting the emphasis on the transition, solving that transition problem is money in the bank for these big companies. Because what kills you is turnover and unhappy employees. Right. Happy employees will perform twice as good as employees who are in the wrong role or they're underutilized. You want people who are stretched a little bit. So I think, showing people what this problem is, and that, if you put a guy that's been leading $50 million worth of equipment and maybe 100 people, right? If you put that guy in a role where he's got 2 people that report to him and he's got $1 million worth of responsibility, do you think he's really going to be happy at the end of the day? No, what he's going to do is he's going to leverage that experience. He's going to teach himself the transition, and then he's going to go somewhere else and use what he's learned from your company against you, instead of you putting him in the right role at the beginning. So I think if you want to share some stats around, that transition problem, how many guys are coming out of the military, and then how long are they staying with people on average? I mean, what's this problem really look like in scope?
Yeah, that's a great point. So right now, the numbers that I saw last, you had about 270,000 transitioning from active veterans from active duty military into the civilian workspace. Of that, a study that was done just 2 years ago, I saw it said that 74% of that 270,000 transitioning veterans within the first 18 months will be looking for or will be starting their second job in the civilian sector from transitioning, from leaving the military.
And my question is, do you think that is because these young men and women aren't qualified,
no,
or because they're overqualified?
Right.
So I can speak on that 18 months because it's almost to the day where I had serious thoughts of leaving and finding another job, another role, because of underutilization.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I went to something that was far more taxing that I felt like I fit. But it took trial and error to find out what that was, and it took me 18 months of kind of like determining what do I want to do. But it fits exactly with that stat of like after 18 months, you know what? Those 18 months, my job satisfaction was not very high. And then once I went into something that was a little more challenging, multiple things going on, making decisions, which was kind of where I had learned my leadership skills, I was much happier. There was much more desire to stay and, truly, truly work hard and because I was happy at work.
And I mean, for all you CFO types out there like myself that, private sector oriented, all about the bottom dollar, when you look at this, time is money. And if folks like Joe, he's a talented individual. If I've invested 18 months worth of training and time and effort into him, and he goes to a competitor and they realize, man, this guy's got a lot more in the tank than what you've been using him for, not only did you lose a really good asset, but somebody else gained the key to probably beating you as a competition. So I think those are all things where this really is about time and money, and being good at what we do. And I think that's where we really come in to help solving this transition problem.
Yeah, and that's just it. So, quick story real quick. I remember the day I kind of came up with the idea for a program like this. My first real quote unquote big boy job outside of the Army was learning how to run a big box store, and it just happened to be it was Black Friday, and it was the night before Black Friday, so we were getting ready to launch. We had people backed off. So we had people lined up. People were starting to get a little rowdy, and my mentor at the time, the acting store manager, was starting to get concerned about how rough the crowds were growing. And he looked at me. He's like, "Hey, you're an Army officer. Go out there and handle it." So I just grabbed a microphone, went in the middle of about 1,000 folks, and stood on top of some boxes, which I probably shouldn't have, but nonetheless stood on top of some boxes, and just calmed the storm. Had everybody kind of divide into lines. Everybody at the end, when we cut the ribbon, everybody got their stuff. No one was injured. We had no problems, and because of it, we ended up getting featured, but in the local news. But the point is that in that moment, people were coming back to me saying, "Oh man, that was amazing! How did you do that?" And I'm just thinking, we do this. This is PT for us. This is nothing. But in that moment, I realized I'm so vastly underutilized in this role, and it was a great opportunity. But again, like Joe was talking about, that happens day in and day out to thousands, now hundreds of thousands of veterans, and that's where we come in. Is we provide an opportunity for folks to go through various industries, through different companies, and see that finance inside of a certain bank is vastly different than finance inside of a manufacturing company, which is different than finance inside of a marketing company. I mean, finance is finance, but at the end of the day, the operations, the flows, it's all different, and people are going to succeed where they're happiest, and that's what we're doing. That's what we're wanting to do with this. Is we're creating essentially a platform for veterans to to regain their sense of self, their intrinsic value, and carry that over to benefit society.
So what we're saying is leadership is far more than any diploma or piece of paper that you can put up on your wall. But I would say that the next time we talk to you, we want to get much more into the details of what's part of the program. What can you expect if you're selected to be a part of the Catalyst?
And then if you're an employment partner, like myself from the civilian sector, what's the benefit, number one? And then how can we help you be more successful and give you an opportunity to meet some of the best and the brightest in the United States military? And that's what we're going to give you the opportunity of. And we're going to talk about that later on. We'll probably feature some candidates, and we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about the process and everything we're going to. And we look forward to hearing from you guys again later.
That it's not